Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another extremely topical and extremely timely AMET webinar. Today is day 327 of the multi-front war that Iran has waged using its terrorist proxies against the State of Israel. As all of you are aware, early Sunday morning at about 5 a.m., the IDF launched a preemptive strike against Hezbollah in Lebanon, kicking out thousands of Hezbollah launchers and rockets. Israeli intelligence has the knowledge that Hezbollah planned a major attack on Tel Aviv and central Israel. Hezbollah claimed to have launched approximately 320 rockets at northern Israel, which Israel knocked out almost entirely, or let some of them land in an empty field. The knee-jerk response from the left is to blame Israel for the quote unquote escalation. Meanwhile, at least 60,000 to 80,000 residents of the north do not feel safe returning to their homes. Ever since the killing of Hezbollah leader Saud on July 30th in Beirut, plus the finding of the body of Mohammed Deif of Hamas, which Israel has not really claimed responsibility for, in Khan Yunis, Gaza, as well as the ultimate humiliation, the July 31st killing of Ismaila Haniyeh in Tehran in an apartment for the IRGC. Israelis have been bracing themselves for a massive response from Tehran and from Hezbollah. The Biden administration has sent the USS Lincoln, a major aircraft carrier, and the USS Georgia, a nuclear submarine, into the Mediterranean, and we're grateful for that. But of course, the United States only wants Israel to strike out defensively, not offensively. Hezbollah has fired at least 7,500 drones and missiles into Israel from southern Lebanon. U.S. State Department spokesman John Kirby said that we have to assume that Iran remains, quote, postured and prepared to strike. Meanwhile, Iran's new foreign minister, Abba Agarchi, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Arakshi, has been reaching out to some Sunni nations in the region, including Turkey, Kuwait, Oman, Egypt, and Qatar. As the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani has stated before his elimination in January of 2020, Iran's goal is to create a quote ring of fire around Israel, and then it will deal with the United States. What is of particular interest is Iran's fraught relationship with Saudi Arabia. Relations between the Shiite Islamic regime and the keeper of the world's two great mosques in Mecca and Medina have been strained for many years. Then in March of 2023, Beijing brokered a bilateral relationship with them. What does this really mean? Does Iran want to assume the mantle as the keeper of the great mosques? Does this have anything to do with Saudi Arabia's vast oil trade? How will this affect Israel's relationship with the Saudis and that of the United States? Here to discuss these issues and more is the brilliant Ambassador Yoram Ettinger. Ambassador Ettinger is perhaps one of the most knowledgeable experts of the entire Middle East and of the relationship between the United States and Israel. He regularly meets with members of Congress and of the Knesset and frequently appears on both Israel and American television and radio. Before we turn to our guest, we need to let you know that AMET not only provides these wonderful weekly webinars with top experts in the field, but we write and publish at least one article a week, and we're on Capitol Hill almost every single day. In a world replete with misinformation, Congress has learned to rely upon us and AMET to provide them with accurate facts and analysis for critical policy decisions. AMET stands on the front lines in offering timely, nonpartisan education on Capitol Hill, and our efforts have been successful in making impactful changes to ensure a more secure future for the United States and for the State of Israel. and we depend upon each and every one of you for your support. Please go to www.emetonline.org to help support us in our valuable work, particularly at this dangerous juncture for the State of Israel and the Jewish people. And one of the many highlights of our year, several times a year, is to be able to walk the halls of Congress with our guest today, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger. First, Yoram, can you describe the historical relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Well, certainly, and I'll start with the leader, the spiritual leader, the supreme leader of Iran, the current one, Khamenei, who recently intensified his references to what he calls the front of Ali versus the front of Yazid. People who are aware of Islamic history, people who are aware of Shiite history would know right away the significance of that reference by the supreme leader of Iran, because when one talks about the front of Ali, one talks about the Shiite front, named after the Shiite leader, Shiite Caliph Ali, whose son Hussein was killed, murdered by the Sunnis, which started the volcanic conflict between Shiites and Sunnis, which started in the 7th century and still raging. And for anyone to understand the policy of the Ayatollahs, one needs to pay attention to the historical background. When the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, talks about the front of Yazid, he refers to the Yazid, the caliph, who, according to the Shiites, betrayed Hussein, the grandson, the Shiite grandson of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, killed him, raped the women associated with Ali, but the name of the caliph was Yazid, and the reference to Yazid has a message. Do not forget Yazid, who has become a role model of treachery and betrayal. And in fact, every Muslim enemy of the Ayatollahs of Iran is referred to as a Yazid, with the emphasis obviously on Saudi Arabia, in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, on account of the obvious fact that the Saudis control Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites for Islam. Moreover, there is an obvious rivalry between Shiite Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia over the domination of the Muslim world. And then comes the issue of the 48% of global oil reserves in the Persian Gulf. And once again, the goal of toppling the Saudi regime has to do with the eagerness to control those 48% of global oil reserves. And last and not least, the Arabian Peninsula, which is dominated currently by Saudi Arabia. The Arabian Peninsula controls the main trade route between the Far East and Europe, namely major impact upon global trade. And for those reasons and more, the Ayatollahs of Iran are focusing on their efforts to topple the so-called Yazid regime, the Sunni regime of the Saudis. For one to understand the level or the weight, the critical role played by this historical reference, one could turn to Judaism. What is Judaism without the annual reference to Passover, which took place about 3,000, 3,500 years ago? This is not common among Western societies, but this is an integral feature of Judaism. And Karbala, the battle of 680 AD, the major betrayal of the Shiites by the Caliph Yazid, plays a critical role in shaping the identity, the worldview, and the day-to-day policies of Shiite Iran. We're talking about a series of milestones which have shaped Iranian Ayatollah's policy. Those are historical milestones starting with the 680 Karbala battle, and then you move on to what they call the Shiite century, mid-10th century through the mid-11th century, where the Shiites were successful in asserting themselves on significant parts of the Muslim world, from Egypt in the west all the way through Lebanon and Syria to the Caspian Sea. This was a relatively short-lived success, but that is deeply, deeply impacting the Iranian ethos, the Shiite ideology and vision. And then comes 1501. 1501 is when Iran, a very significant country in the Middle East, in Asia, a very significant Muslim country, declared Shiite Islam to be its official religion. And that's the first time that a significant Muslim country recognized Shiism as its own religion. And then comes 1979, the Islamic Revolution, which highlights or mandates the exportation of that revolution, not only to the Persian Gulf and not only to the Middle East and not only to the Horn of Africa and East Africa, North Africa, West Africa, but all the way to Latin America. And according to the supreme leader of Iran, according to the state of mind of the Ayatollahs controlling Iran since 1979, this is the modern day Shiite century, which they expect to be much more successful than the Shiite century of the 10th and 11th century. And many people in the West would ridicule such worldview, would not according much significance, but I suggest that we take it very, very seriously, because you look back at 1979, when the Ayatollahs were successful in toppling the Shah of Iran, by the way, with a great essential help by the US administration, led by the US State Department, which once again fumbled when it comes to its Middle East policy. But in 1979, when they took over Iran, they were hardly a second-rate power. Today, 45 years later, they are a global power to reckon with. They're a global power which has the ability to destabilize not only the Middle East, but literally the entire world on a verge of becoming a nuclear power. And therefore, I would take very, very seriously the Ayatollah's vision. And when Khamenei, the supreme leader, talks about the Ali front versus the Yazid front, that means a direct threat to every single pro-American Arab country, especially the oil-producing Arab countries, which impact the price at the pump, which impact greatly the state of the U.S. Economy. We're talking about 1979, which ushered in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They are literally almost the personal military power of the Ayatollahs of Iran, and they have been entrusted with external policy, external attempts to export the Islamic Revolution, and a focus by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard has been the agitation, the subversion in the Shiite part of Saudi Arabia. The Shiites are roughly 20% of the Saudi population, but in the leading oil region in Saudi Arabia, which is the eastern province, in that area, they constitute a majority, which has been targeted by the Shiites of Iran in an attempt to destabilize Saudi Arabia. We're talking about a very critical area for Saudi Arabia, for the entire world, because this is the prime area of oil production in Saudi Arabia, the capital of the oil production of Saudi Arabia. This is the area where Ras Tanura is the leading oil refinery and point of export of oil in Saudi Arabia. It's located in the eastern province, again, where most people are Shiites and where the Islamic Revolutionary Guard has been pretty active. They're also very active agitating Kuwait as well. There is a major offshore oil field, Al Dura, which is owned jointly by Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, but claimed by Iran's Ayatollahs. And obviously, the Ayatollahs of Iran have focused on Bahrain, the tiny island in the Persian Gulf, which is basically an extension of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the patron of Bahrain. In Bahrain, there is a Shiite majority. There are different statistics, assessments, how sizable it is. But as far as I know, the lowest estimate is 60% Shiite majority. We're talking about Bahrain, where Bahrainis are a minority. The majority in Bahrain are non-Bahrainis who are employed by Bahrain, some say enslaved by Bahrain, in order to sustain the extremely high standard of living by the Sunni rulers of Bahrain. And that, again, has been targeted by Iran. they're not only, they don't limit their subversion and terrorizing efforts to the Persian Gulf. A recent target has been Jordan, which is very relevant to Saudi Arabia. In Jordan, there has been a growing subversive and terrorist activity by the Ayatollahs of Iran, which is very, very rational from the point of view of the Iranian ambition. And the Iranian ambition, going back to those historical milestones, that ambition is also very, very clearly stated in the 1979 Ayatollah's constitution. It's rehearsed every single day in Iranian school system. It's rehearsed and underscored every single Friday in mosque sermons, and the message is very, very clear. The mission of the Ayatollahs is first and foremost to vindicate the tragedy of Hussein, who was murdered by Yazid the Sunni, to revenge that betrayal by toppling every single what they call apostate regime. Apostate regime is another name, or heretic regime is another name for the Sunni, pro-American, all-producing Arab regimes, in addition to Egypt and Jordan, all the way to North Africa, all the way to Morocco. Jordan is a key element, and in recent years, with the assistance of Iranian-supported terrorists based in Iraq and in Syria, leveraging the roughly 2 million Syrian refugees in northern Jordan, Iran has accelerated its attempts to topple the pro-American Hashemite regime in Jordan. And again, there are those who say, well, that's Jordan's problem. Why should we care about it in Pennsylvania or Texas or Michigan or California? Well, it's directly related to homeland security in America, because a successful attempt to topple the pro-American Hashemite regime in Jordan would transform Jordan into a chaotic state, into an arena for a number of Islamic terrorist states in the mode of Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, or Yemen. And this has to do also with the existence inside Jordan of a very robust Muslim Brotherhood presence. Muslim Brotherhood, although they're Sunnis, they have collaborated in modern times with the Shiites in Iran against the mutual enemy, namely the infidel West, and primarily the great American Satan. We're talking about Jordan with roughly 60, some say 70% Palestinian majority, which provides pretty significant foothold for a number of Palestinian terror organizations. And then you have the Bedouin reality in Jordan, which is far from cohesive. The Bedouins in the south, the Bedouin tribes in the south regard the Hashemite Bedouins as carpetbaggers who were transferred to Jordan by the British back in the 1920s. They frequently accuse the Hashemites of being overly westernized, especially the late King Hussein, the current King Abdullah, and their wives and the recent queens in Jordan. The bottom line is that the Iranians have uh, objectively pretty fertile ground in Jordan, where there is, for good reason, American military presence, where there is very tight collaboration between the Jordanian national security elements and Israel's own national security, be it the IDF, be it the Mossad and other agencies, cooperating, collaborating, independent of the peace process, or I should say, this has been a major or the major inducement for Jordan to sign, to conclude peace accord with Israel, not because they finally realized that the Jewish state indeed genuinely aspires for peace. They're looking for life insurance agents in the area. They do not trust the U.S., which at best zigzags depending on the identity of the president in the White House. They do not trust fellow Arabs because some of them are also after the Hashemites. Others have the Ayatollah's machetes and the Muslim Brotherhood machete at their throat. And when it comes to Israel, they know left and right in Israel, secular and religious in Israel, recognize the importance of the Hashemite regime in Jordan, controlling the longest border of Israel, the most critical border of Israel. And that's also a major reason for the Ayatollahs to target Jordan. And they know once they succeed to topple the Hashemite, the pro-American Hashemite regime, not only do they deal a major blow to American credibility, America's posture of deterrence in the area, because America is dedicated, the U.S. dedicated to preserve the pro-American Hashemite regime. But in addition of dealing a major blow to American posture in the Middle East and beyond, they also would be successful in engulfing, in encircling Israel, Lebanon and Syria in the north, Jordan in the east, but then also Jordan neighbors Saudi Arabia. Jordan is the Saudis' northern border, and toppling the pro-Hashemite regime and transforming Jordan to an arena of pro-Iranian, pro-ISIS, pro-Palestinian, pro-Muslim terrorist organization would create a very, very threatening ripple effect into Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia would then be engulfed between terrorist Jordan in the north, Iraq and Iran in the east, and Yemen in the south. And this is a major double header for Saudi Arabia. A key issue here is that while we are talking about the track record of the Ayatollahs of Iran, and I haven't referred to at all to the track record of the Ayatollahs in South and Central America, where they have collaborated with Hezbollah terrorists since the early 1980s, establishing terrorist camps in the tri-border areas of Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil, in the tri-border area of Chile and Bolivia and Peru, training terrorists to become active in Latin America and inside the USA, as well as dispatching terrorists to the Middle East, also collaborating both the Ayatollahs and Hezbollah with every single drug cartel in Mexico, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Brazil, supplying the drug cartels with equipment to construct underground tunnels, similar to the tunnels they helped constructing in Gaza, in Lebanon, inside Syria, namely transforming drug cartels in potentially into a major and highly fortified terror entity. We're also talking about the Ayatollahs supplying the drug cartels in Venezuela with Iranian developed, Iranian manufactured Predator unmanned aerial vehicles, which today are haunting Ukraine, employed by Russia. And let's face it, some of it is haunting Israel today, employed by Hezbollah. But while all that takes place, and not in an underground manner, but this is done in a very, very public and I would say stormy manner, we have a U.S. Policy which follows the diplomatic option. And recently, that American diplomatic option supposedly, and I underline supposedly, received the support from the resumption of diplomatic ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But here again, we should pay attention to the fact that this is not the first time that diplomatic ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia are resumed. We did experience it back in after the rupture of the relations in 1988, following the execution, following the riots of Shiites in Mecca during the Hajj, the pilgrimage, where some 400 people were executed, killed, and there are different statistics. How many were Shiites? How many were Saudi Sunnis? And then you have the execution of Nimr. Nimr al-Nimr was a major Shiite leader in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. He agitated the Shiite majority in that oil region, supported by the Ayatollahs of Iran, and he was tried, he was executed, beheaded, and that caused another rupture between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And obviously we have the Iranian support of the Houthis in Yemen, and the Houthis targeted a large number of Saudi oil installations, Saudi civilian centers, and that only fomented more conflicts between the two countries. And once again, this time with Chinese interceding, there is a resumption of diplomatic relations, but don't be misled by that, because the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is not misled by that. The Crown Prince is aware of what I would call one of the fundamental laws in human life, and this is that leopards don't change spots; they only change tactics. And Iranian spots, namely the Iranian ideology, has remained intact. And the Saudis are well aware of that, which, by the way, is a chief cause for them to establish relatively close defense ties with Israel, in addition to relatively close agriculture, irrigation, and technology ties between the two countries. But as far as the State Department, they still embrace their alternate reality. They reject the Middle East reality, and they assume that if they shower upon the Ayatollahs sufficient number of billions of dollars since 1979, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars showered upon the Ayatollahs with the illusion that this would induce them to accept peaceful coexistence with their Sunni Arab neighbors. This would entice them to become good faith negotiators and, most importantly, abandon their radical fanatic ideology, which is 1400-year old. And that type of yearning by the State Department reminds me of an old country western song by George Strait, who used to be one of the great country western singers in the 1980s and 1990s. And one of his hits is I've got some oceanfront property in Arizona, and if you buy that, I'll throw the Golden Gate in free. And we're examining the State Department attitude towards the Middle East at large, but especially towards the Ayatollahs. We talk about 45 years of diplomatic option. I have no doubt they never heard that song by George Strait, and they never studied the lesson of that song. They genuinely believe that terrorism is driven by despair. This is Secretary of State Tony Blinken's personal ideology or worldview. This is the State Department establishment's worldview. They also believe, Secretary Blinken and the establishment of the State Department, they also believe that money talks, just the way it's done in most circles in the West. And they do not realize yet, even after showering the Ayatollahs with hundreds of billions of dollars, that there are entities in the Middle East, regimes in the Middle East, where ideology transcends, and I would say transcends by far, standard of living, enhancement of education, and peaceful coexistence. And my last comment would be, again, drawn from my years in Texas, and this is an advice to any Western: be wary of deadly coral snake posing as harmless skipjack snake. Too often, the West has been bitten by venomous snakes posing as harmless snake, and the chief snake or the chief octopus with arms stretching from the Gulf to the US-Mexico border has been the Ayatollahs. And if you want to resolve the Israel-Hamas war, Israel-Hezbollah war, rather than focusing upon the relative tumbleweeds, you better focus upon the smothering lethal sandstorms, which is based in Tehran, Iran.
Wonderful. Very comprehensive, Yoram. I have a bunch of questions of my own, and there's some from the audience, and I apologize if we haven't or we won't be able to get to all of them. One question is, sociologically speaking, when you look at the makeup of places like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, you know, Qatar. We're not talking about liberal democracies. We're talking about repressive monarchies, repressive autocracies. So, how would a Shiite minority or even a Shiite majority in Bahrain um, be able to topple these sorts of regimes without the fear of massive, massive punishment?
Well, we're not talking only about Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. We're talking about the Middle East, the entire Arab Muslim Middle East, which since the 7th century has never experienced democracy, with regimes ascending to power not through the ballot, but all of them through the so-called bullet, namely one sort of violence. And that has been the rule in the entire Middle East. The US does not face a choice between regimes which adhere to democracy and regimes which do not adhere to democracy or human rights. The US has a choice between pro-US regimes which do not adhere to democracy and violate human rights, or anti-US regimes which do not adhere to democracy and violate human rights. In that context, however, we should not overlook certain developments which could, not yet, but could potentially become major game-changing developments. One is the United Arab Emirates, which is very different from the vast majority of Arab Muslim entities in the Middle East. We're talking about Emirates which are ethnically cohesive. Tribally, they are very cohesive. And this is an exception in the Middle East, where in every other Arab entity, tribal allegiance transcends national allegiance. This is not a problem in the Emirates, in the United Arab Emirates, where every single emirate is cohesive. But more than that, in the UAE, we have seen major changes, reforms in the education system. Also, with regard to Jews and Israel, the UAE, as far as I know, is the only Arab country which uprooted completely all negative references or hate references to Jews and to the Jewish state. And this has been reflected by their ties with the Jewish community at large in the world and with Israel. Saudi Arabia, under the Crown Prince, has made tremendous, very significant step forward. I'm aware that in the West, there was, still is, focus on the fate of the Saudi journalist who dare criticize the Crown Prince, and as a result, he disappeared after he was executed in an ugly manner by people in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. I'm aware of it, and I'm not exactly enamored with such a method, but in the Middle East, the Crown Prince is a major force of moderation and reform when it comes to human rights, when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to attitude towards Jews and towards the Jewish state. He hasn't gone yet all the way, just like the UAE has done, and this is for obvious reasons. He's not ruling over a cohesive society. He has within his own ruling family substantial element of opposition. As a result, some 1,500 princes have been in house arrest since he has ascended to power. It's a very flashy house arrest in their own palaces. But then you have the Wahhabi opposition inside Saudi Arabia, the fundamentalist, the Puritan element in Saudi Arabia, mostly situated in central and southwest Saudi Arabia, until the days of the crown prince, who is now has been the effective ruler of Saudi Arabia, until he ascended or claimed that power. The Wahhabis were considered as the final, the only credible authority on Islam, on the Quran. The Crown Prince is the first ever Saudi leader to challenge the Wahhabis publicly, not in eyeball to eyeball discussion, but publicly claiming, with all due respect, while I hold you in high esteem, you're not the only source of interpretation of Quran, of Islam, and I have a different interpretation, which happens to be much, much more moderate, much more tolerant than the Wahhabis or than the traditional interpretation. How long will the Crown Prince be able to sustain himself? I think that each one of us should pray every single day for his safety, for his fortune, because his success is this could be the success of the Middle East to have a major turning point from 14 centuries of volcanic, intolerant, violent, anti-infidel type of reality to a much more moderate, much more accommodating reality, which could change the degree of stability all over the world. And therefore, yes, we have a Shiite problem, Shiite majority in Bahrain, which considers itself to be pressured, discriminated against, but we should be aware this is within a context of a 1,400-year-old arm wrestling, violent arm wrestling between the Shiites and the Sunnis, where the life of the ruling family in Bahrain is at risk every single day due to agitation of the Shiites in Bahrain by the Ayatollahs of Iran.
So, going back to one of the many tentacles of the Iranian octopus, do you believe that this Sunday morning's attack on Hezbollah has convinced Nasrallah not to enter into a full-scale war against Israel? And it seems like there's a return to this kind of tit for tat sort of bombing coming from Hezbollah to northern Israel.
Well, first of all, it's not Hezbollah's decision. It's the Ayatollahs of Iran decision. Hezbollah is a proxy of the Ayatollah. Without the Ayatollahs, they would lose their stature, just like Hamas, which is also a proxy of the Ayatollahs, in addition of being a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. But as far as Hezbollah, and similarly, as far as Hamas, as far as the Ayatollahs, as far as the Palestinian Authority, by the way, we're talking about entities which are driven by a very fanatic, well-entrenched ideology. And that ideology mandates as far as Ayatollahs and Hamas and Hezbollah, it mandates the toppling of all Sunni, of all apostate regimes. As far as Hamas being part of the Muslim Brotherhood, it mandates the toppling of all national Islamic regime and establishing a global Islamic society. And as far as the Palestinian Authority, their entrenched vision mandates the elimination of the Jewish state. The common denominator between the Ayatollahs, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Palestinian Authority is that they all are they are based on a very well entrenched vision, which is reflected by their day-to-day life, day-to-day education, day-to-day worshiping, day-to-day terrorizing, and that vision mandates the elimination of the infidel Jewish state. Their vision is not going to be attained without the elimination of the Jewish state. That, by the way, sets them apart from every single Arab country. There's no doubt that Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan and UAE and Bahrain and Morocco and South Sudan, they would prefer to see a Middle East without a Jewish state. But each one of their own national vision is not based on the elimination of the Jewish state. The Crown Prince has a vision 2030, and that vision has nothing to do with the elimination of Israel. In fact, according to the Crown Prince, to achieve his vision, which means by 2030 to transform Saudi Arabia into a major regional and global military and economic power, he needs Israel. He views Israel as a required ally in order to free himself of the energy-reliant economy. He wants to diversify the economy. In order to diversify the economy, he has a very, very useful neighbor not far away, Israel, the startup nation. And as a result, we have had in recent years growing collaboration, technological collaboration with the Saudis, irrigation collaboration, agricultural collaboration. Egypt has its own vision. It does not require the elimination of Israel. Certainly Morocco, which, by the way, is indebted to Israel's intelligence and counter-terrorism assistance throughout the year. Those Arab countries have concluded peace treaties with Israel because it does not conflict with their ideology, with their underlying worldview. When it comes to the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, those two entities follow a vision which mandates the elimination of Israel. And not since October 7. The Palestinian Authority is basically controlled by the PLO. The PLO was established in 1964, 3 years before 1967, under a charter which requires the elimination of the Jewish state and freeing Palestine of the Jewish state before we reunited Jerusalem, before we returned to Judea and Samaria. The PLO is dominated by Fatah, and Fatah was established in 1959 through, again, a charter. And the charter requires to free Palestine of the Zionist rule. they did not refer to Judea, Samaria, or Gaza, or East Jerusalem. Namely, we're talking about entities which are driven by vision which mandate the elimination of Israel. With them, it's impossible, in my mind, to achieve constructive process of negotiation. Hezbollah, in the same way, they follow the Ayatollah's vision of eliminating all infidel and apostate regime. We are one of those infidel regimes, along with the great American Satan.
Right. I have so many questions, but one thing I did want to bring up with you, Yoram, is the Saudis are insisting before joining the Abraham Accords or formalizing negotiations with Israel on a Palestinian state. What is your feeling about that?
Well, it's not a question of feeling. Uh, we have heard, the Saudi foreign minister mostly talking about the need to establish a Palestinian state. It's rarely pronounced by the crown prince, but that's the obvious Arab talk, Saudi talk, and I emphasize talk, which has been going on for decades about the need to establish a Palestinian state. But then we have the Saudi and the other countries, Arab countries, walk. And the walk has been anywhere from indifferent to negative. As far as Saudi Arabia, there would not be peace treaty between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, or Israel and Bahrain, or Israel and Morocco, or Israel and South Sudan, if it would not be backed by Saudi Arabia. Then it was not preconditioned upon establishing a Palestinian state. The Saudis do not have peace accord with Israel, but they have evolved into pretty close ties with Israel, defense ties and commercial ties, never preconditioned upon establishing a Palestinian state. In November of 2023, about a month and a half after the eruption of the current Israel-Hamas war, the Crown Prince hosted a joint summit of the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Countries. And during that joint summit, the Palestinians, Iranians, and Algerians submitted a resolution calling for the immediate cessation of all diplomatic, defense, touristic, financial ties with Israel. The resolution was resoundingly defeated, led by Saudi Arabia and UAE, Bahrain, and Jordan, and Egypt, and Morocco, and other non-Arab Muslim countries. And the reason is very, very clear. Unlike the State Department, which pays attention to talk and talk and talk, in that case, the Palestinian talk, Mahmoud Abbas talking to American officials, Mahmoud Abbas talking to American media people, Mahmoud Abbas talking to prominent Jews from the US. And what do you expect Mahmoud Abbas, who is a very smart person, but to express himself moderately? But that's the talk. The Saudis could care less about talk. Saudis focus on the walk. And the walk of the Palestinian leadership has been systematically rogue in the intra-Arab context. The Saudis are aware of the Palestinian terrorism inside Egypt during the 1950s when they were hosted by then President Nasser. They are aware of the Palestinian terrorism inside Syria when they were hosted by Syria to terrorize Israel from Syria. They are aware of Palestinian terrorism inside Jordan when Jordan allowed them to terrorize Israel. They're aware of the Palestinians hosted by Lebanon for 12 years, but then plundering Lebanon, causing series of civil wars, and the Saudis are aware of the Palestinians collaborating with Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait in August of 1990, at a time when Kuwait was the most generous Arab host of Palestinians, absorbing 400,000 Palestinians, allowing them to rise to most prominent position in the area of business and administration. And that was the reason. Their betrayal of their Kuwaiti host was the reason for the leadership of Kuwait upon being restored to power by the Americans after the first Gulf War of January 1991. The first thing the Kuwaitis did was to expel almost all 400,000 Palestinians from Kuwait. The Saudis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Emiratis, and the rest of the Arabs are aware of that. They also are aware that the Palestinians traditionally have collaborated with anti-Western entities, Nazi Germany, the Soviet bloc, Ayatollah Khomeini, currently with North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, training international terrorists. And the Saudis know, should there be a Palestinian state, it would be a death sentence for the Hashemite regime in Jordan, which could doom eventually the Saudis themselves. And therefore, unlike Foggy Button, unlike the State Department, they do not pay much attention to Palestinian moderate talk. They pay most attention, or the entire attention, to the Palestinian rogue inter-Arab walk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm afraid our time is up. This has been delightful. I have so many more questions to ask you, as does our audience, and we will be delighted to have you back again soon. Again, thank you so much, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger. And please be sure, if you like what you hear, please be sure to support us at ametonline.org. Thank you so much, Yoram. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much.